FTC issuing an order to 9 social media companies and streaming services about how they collect and use user data. We want to get to Dan Halley, who is looking into this for us. Dan?
That's right. The FTC is essentially asking, Shauna, companies ranging from TikTok to Reddit and a number of others, how they collect data and what it's used for. It seems to have a good deal to do with marketing and advertising and how teens and children are targeted, but it doesn't say it has any specific law enforcement action. So they're basically asking these companies to comply so they can better understand how algorithms and the like work. And then I assume get an understanding of what the companies are able to do overall. But again, this has gone out, but it does specifically say that there is no law enforcement action included. But this does come as the FTC is making a lot of big moves as far as big tech goes. We know that the FTC went after Facebook just last week on antitrust grounds. We also know that the DOJ went after Google. And we do know that Amazon and Apple are lined up for their own investigations and perhaps their own suits coming. But this really is kind of a time where it seems that big tech is finally getting reined in by the government to some degree. And this kind of action does make it seem as though they have their eye on them even more closely than before.
Dan, I'm trying to understand what this truly could mean. There's that documentary that's playing, it's streaming right now, Social Dilemma. Is it that kind of data that they're going after, the stuff that's used to keep us clicking on something or that's tailored to us that keeps us engaged?
It's data similar to that, and it's basically along those lines and trying to understand what that means and what it does. I assume they're very vague about what they want in their news release, at least. But it does seem as though they want to have a better understanding of how the data is collected and used to essentially market these different kinds of solutions to consumers, especially younger teens and children. That was something that really stood out in the press release, to me at least. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to hear about. Obviously, there have been discussions about that during the most recent antitrust hearing, where we saw Facebook and rather not antitrust, Section 230 hearing, my mistake. There's been so many between Facebook and Twitter. Senator Lindsey Graham had brought up the addictive nature of social media in particular and kind of likened it to big tobacco to a degree. So we'll have to see if that has anything to do with it. It doesn't seem as though it does, but it does kind of bring up the idea that this is the data that's being collected, and that's what the FTC wants to know about. Shortly after we heard that from Senator Graham.
Hey, Dan, we also want to ask you about this big story today, the massive outage for Google. And it probably affected some of our viewers in some way because it prevented people from accessing Gmail, from YouTube, and also Google Classroom for a little bit. Do we know any more just about what caused this massive outage or anything, I guess, just in terms of the potential implications of this?
Yeah, it seems to have been some issue on the back end that had to do with storage. And essentially, they figured it out in a relatively short order and managed to get services restored. But because of this one error, it knocked out huge swaths of Google for a large portion of the world. We're talking about everything from YouTube to Google Meet, Calendar, anything outside of the main Google search seemed to be impacted. And it just goes to show how important this service really is to people, especially at this time when so many people are working from home. And look, if you're going to start to talk about how we'll see a larger transition to a work from home environment, then these will be even more important going forward. So it behooves the likes of Google, Microsoft, the other main players in this space to ensure that this kind of issue doesn't come up. And yes, it is a news story because of the work from home environment, and also because it doesn't happen very often. Anytime we have some kind of issue with Google being down, YouTube being down, it becomes a major story because of how many people rely on it and because it doesn't happen very often. But if we're talking about a greater work from home environment, then I do think that something like Google really needs to be on its P's and Q's and ensure that it doesn't have these kinds of massive outages.
Yeah, we can see Google stock off a little bit today on the heels of that news, down just around 1% with an hour to go. All right, Dan Halley, thanks so much.